Helping out a rugby club is always time well spent. Your local rugby club needs more volunteers. Go on, get involved.
Good evening, everybody, and welcome to our first instalment of the COVID-19 Safety Coordinator training. My name is Steve Terrell. I'm the Regional Director for Caledonia Midlands, and I've been working with my colleagues in our Return to Rugby piece of work, and I've been leading on this element of work. So I'm delighted to have our first webinar tonight. We'll talk a wee bit about the role, go into a wee bit of specifics in terms of the roles and responsibilities with the role. But I think first and foremost, great to see so many people joining us tonight. I think we've got almost 200 people joining this webinar tonight, and over about 117 to 120 nominated coordinators throughout our clubs and schools, which is fantastic. So really appreciate you giving up the time and joining this session tonight, which will be the first of a few as we go through our Return to Rugby phases. Just in terms of webinar details, so we will go through a wee bit of information tonight. Don't worry too much if you don't absorb everything. The slides will be available, so we'll send out the slides after this. We're also recording the webinar too, so we'll look to upload the recording of the webinar on the website, so we'll be able to pick that up as well after this evening. We also have a Q&A function, so given the number that are joining us, as I say, we've got just shy of 200 join this webinar tonight. We won't necessarily do a verbal Q&A as we go, but there is a Q&A function on your screens, so you can type in questions as we go through the slides. We will try and answer some as we go, and we may pick out a couple of key questions at the end of the webinar, but I suppose most importantly, we'll summarise all the questions that have come in. We'll follow it with an FAQs document, which we'll push out early next week, just to ensure that we do answer all the questions as we go, because I'm sure there will be a few as we go through tonight. In terms of agenda and panels and presenters, so there's myself, as I said, Steve Turnbull, the Regional Director. I'll just start off by giving us a bit of an update, an overview of the role, some of the key responsibilities, and then a wee bit on the training support that we'll provide you as safety coordinators within your clubs and schools. Dr. James Robson, our Chief Medical Officer, will provide a bit of a COVID-19 update. We'll then hand over to Neil Graham, our Head of Training and Education, and Neil will just give a bit of an overview of our Phase 2 guidance, which I'm sure most of you are familiar with, but will just be a bit of a refresh of the guidance that we released on Friday last week and covered off in a webinar on Monday this week as well, just to reinforce some of the key messages within that Phase 2 guidance. We'll then have Jen Griffin. Jen's Regional Director for Glasgow South, and Jen's been leading the facilities piece of Return to Rugby. So Jen's just going to do a wee bit on pitch reopening, some of the risk assessments that are attached to that, which will come within this role, and a wee bit of context around facility guidance as well. And then to finish off, we'll be back to myself, and I'll just talk a wee bit about our team leads. So I'll talk a bit about a support network that we can build around this role within your clubs and schools, and then some specific guidance examples around the return to train element on the pitch with activity and coaching guidance. And as I said at the end, we might, if we've got time, we might pick out just a couple of key questions before we close. So in terms of the role, I suppose just to kind of cover off the kind of the purpose and why we see this COVID-19 safety coordinator as such a crucial role within our clubs and schools, and really it's to is for somebody within that club and school, within that environment, to kind of be responsible and kind of ensure that the club and the school's operating in a safe manner, has all the correct policies and compliance elements within that environment, so to ensure that we are returning to rugby in a safe manner. Some of the key responsibilities, we've got a fairly detailed role profile and job description on the website, but as we go through this evening, we'll just kind of pull out some key elements which are probably more relevant to now, and they will be the training risk assessment, which we'll touch on with Jen. We'll talk a wee bit about check-in and check-out process, which will help with our supporting NHS with the contact tracing when we are returning to training. As I said, we'll talk a wee bit about the team leads. So we will be recommending that as safety coordinators within your club, we appoint team leads who will look after teams or age or training groups to help manage the day-to-day compliance and just to provide that bit of support to this role on a day-to-day operational basis. And we'll also just talk a wee bit about I think just the importance of ensuring that this role is embedded within the club governance as part of the club. What we don't want is for this return to rugby and COVID-19 compliance to sit with one person within the club. I think it really needs to be part of the core functioning of the club and part of the governance. And certainly a recommendation that we're making is that this COVID-19 safety coordinator is reporting into the club committee. It becomes a core function of committee meetings and is on the agenda of committee meetings as well. So it's really embedded within the club governance. As I say, we'll go into a wee bit of detail as we move through the presentation. But this job description on your right-hand side of the screen is available on the website, and there's more detail within there as well. What's absolutely crucial from our point of view and as our role as governing bodies to ensure that there's appropriate support as we go through this phase. We're obviously in quite unprecedented and challenging times, and as we're finding out as well, the things are moving at pace, and sometimes on a weekly basis we're getting new updates from Scottish Government with regards to our guidelines and what we need to adhere to ensure that we are returning to rugby in a safe manner. So part of our kind of core function and what we'll absolutely take responsibility to is that we have an appropriate programme of training and support for safety coordinators. So what we'd intend to do is every time there's a new phase release, we will pre-plan and schedule in a training webinar for the safety coordinators. But we also expect, and as we've probably seen over the last week or so, that there are sometimes updates within the phases, and we would look to put on ad hoc on ongoing webinars for training purposes as well, to ensure that the dissemination of information from Scottish Government and the guidance and advice that we're producing from Scottish Rugby is passed on in a coherent manner to use safety coordinators, so then you can then disseminate that into your club and school environments. On top of that, we will look to run regular check-ins where this is really just an opportunity to provide extra support. So we have mechanism of support, and it will be an opportunity potentially for some sharing of best practice amongst our clubs. So we'll need to monitor that because numbers are quite high at the moment as well. But I think this is probably quite a core piece of work that we will look to do, particularly as we progress through the stages and phases of our return to rugby roadmap, to ensure that there is that constant support mechanism in place for yourselves within your roles. And then the third element of support that we're providing is, of course, just through resource and documents which should be available through the Scottish Rugby website. There's a number of elements and documents on there already, and we'll touch on some of them tonight. But as we go through, again, the phases of return to rugby, we will keep updating, refreshing guidelines, guidance documents, which will be useful for you in your club and school environments to utilise as you see fit. So, very brief overview. We'll go into a wee bit more detail as we go through the presentation tonight, but I'm now just going to pass on to Dr. James Robson, who's going to give a bit of a COVID-19 update. Thanks, James.
Thanks, Stevie. Good evening, everybody. And a heartfelt thanks for joining the webinar tonight. We've all lived through what is a global emergency for the past 12, 14 weeks, and we've all got to know the various terminology. But I'd just like to reiterate a couple of points, Stevie. I have to say the government have said this frequently, but I would like to reiterate it. The reason that we are in a very much better place 12 weeks on is because of the sacrifices that the Scottish public have made, and the efforts that you've made to comply with lockdown and with the general gentle easing of lockdown has helped to suppress the virus, but it hasn't gone away. Many of you will become very familiar with the R rate. That's the rate of transmission of the virus. When we started in the pandemic several weeks ago, one infected person or infectious person was infecting up to 4.5, 5 other people. We now believe that one person perhaps infects every other person that they meet. So the R number is down to about 0.6 to 0.8, and it's been there for several weeks now, which allows the government to slowly and cautiously ease lockdown. That said, the virus has not gone away. You may be familiar with the press at the moment, highlighting a couple of clusters, one in the borders around Dumfries, Galloway, and across to Cumbria, and the other in Grampian. The Grampian one has been cleared up, and that's now done and dusted, but the one down in the borders gives concern with 10 known cases and a number of people now being tested. So unless we all do our part, and unless you very kindly do your part, then we are all still at risk. It's estimated that although new cases coming to light, number in the single digits, there's perhaps at the moment over 1,500 infectious people in the community. And quite often just looking at people, you can't be sure who's infectious. Stevie. Next slide, please. So we would ask you to continue to be patient. We have perhaps been criticized by some for being slow, but even working with the national team and with the 2 pro teams, we are progressing our return to possible training in a very slow and thoughtful manner. We need the buy-in from everybody because the virus hasn't gone away, and unless we continue to suppress it, it will rear its head again, and we will perhaps have to go backwards, as south of the border have found in Leicester. So that's very important to understand why we're here tonight, considering this very important matter. I've always believed that rugby is the most sociable sport, and it's the most team-based sport. The team ethic is paramount. There is no other sport where you can take the field and literally knock an awful lot out of each other and then shake hands at the end of it. And success in returning our game to the game that we all know and love depends on all of us and all of you. And to that end, quite often the players that I'm involved in, the teams that I'm involved in, if they see something that is against the team ethic, they call it out. And so we're asking you to watch each other and do your best to advise people that perhaps that's not the way to do things, and that if we're going to get through this together, we need to do it in a thoughtful and logical manner. So I would thank you again for coming in this evening. I would say that, a bit like Crime Watch, do not have nightmares. The virus is diminishing, but it's not going to go away anytime soon. We've got to all keep doing the right thing. But thank you for your help.
Thanks, James. So I'm just going to hand over to Neil now, who's going to just give us a wee update on the return to rugby phase 2 guidelines. Thanks, Neil.
Thanks, Steve. Thanks, James. Great to see everyone on here. We've got, close to 200 people now. Fantastic. So, yeah, brilliant uptake. A lot of you will have maybe dialed into the webinar on Monday and seen the guidance last week. And this is a very fluid situation, as you're all aware. So the next slides that Steve's going to just show really just give you a bit of an overview of the guidance that we outlined last Friday. But as you'll probably see by a couple of these slides, as of the next couple of days, they'll be out of date, and that's really how quickly things are moving from a policy perspective and our guidelines. All of this information can be found on a central hub on the Scottish Rugby website, and everything will be in date order. So we're really keen to provide one central point of true up-to-date information, and Steve will certainly send out that link later on. So as we are in phase 2, there's no large group organised games or activities at any age group. Players can train outside, and obviously to stay physically healthy is really important during this period. So we certainly encourage people to do that. But physical distancing of 2 meters is still very much in the frame at this stage. Thanks, Steve. From a pitches perspective, and Jen will go into a bit more detail regarding what this looks like and the processes behind it, but pitches can open. I think the word can is really crucial in this. They can be opened, they don't need to be opened. And that was as of the 29th of June. And that's very much still for individuals to train in groups of 8 per pitch maximum from 2 other households. So 3 households in total, group of 8. In order to ensure that we're abiding by rules around contact tracing, clubs need to have a check-in and check-out reporting process to allow, if there was a positive test in any of the players, to allow people who have been in contact with that person to be traced. And the last one, which is probably the most fluid of these, is around about facilities. So we announced last week that obviously indoor facilities need to remain closed, including toilets. Jen will give you an update on that in a moment. And as of today, outdoor catering must remain closed. But as you'll be aware, and as Jen will go into more detail on Monday, catering outlets can actually open. So this information we are looking to update tomorrow. And there'll be a new refreshed infographic and guidance document published on the website tomorrow, along with, as Steve will talk about, we are communicating our wider roadmap tomorrow as well, which is great, and that'll give a bit more context to things. So with all this guidance and with everything in society at the moment, everything is subject to Scottish Rugby, Scottish Government guidance, and we do have some fantastic links in through Dr. James into the government. So we are keeping up to date with all current discussions on key pieces of legislation, and we will keep you as key people within our clubs up to date through these weekly check-ins or regular check-ins as much as possible. So that's really a brief overview from me, and as I say, Jen will go into more details about some of these areas in a moment. So thanks, Steve.
Thanks, Neil. Yeah, I think it just this will reinforce when we talk about training and support for us. The fluid nature of this reinforces the need for webinars as we go through the process. So tonight's the first one. I think there will be webinars, particularly over the next couple of weeks, where we will have an opportunity to update on the various updates as we progress. But I'll hand over to Jen just now, who's going to give a bit of on pitch and facility guidance.
Thanks, Steve. So just going over what Neil said there, in terms of outdoor facilities, pitches were allowed to open as of the 29th of June. So you will have had that information that went out last Friday and outlined that, and there were some key examples of how you could manage that with the maximum numbers that are allowed. The next step in the facilities piece is that as of the 6th of July, outdoor catering and hospitality can take place. So that's the next kind of significant step forward. This was originally planned at the start of phase 2 and then was pushed back. So we initially thought it was going to go in phase 2. We had some things ready to go. It got pushed back and we thought it was actually going to be pressed back even further, but everything looks, as of today, good to go for the 6th of July. In terms of indoor facilities, for now, they still should remain closed to the public. The exception is that public can use the toilets. However, there is significant guidance on what best practice is for that. A kind of higher intensity of cleaning, higher frequency of cleaning, managing that physical distance within the areas to and from toilets. All that information can be found on the government website, and we've given you the link there. So all the advice you need for that is there. The things to consider on this is if the pitch is owned or managed by the local authority, the club should contact them directly before opening. Some local authorities are moving differently from others. They may have staffing redeployment challenges, so opening up outdoor facilities may not be something that they are considering doing at the moment. They may know when, they may not know when, and I would just ask you to be sympathetic to that. Because they are receiving information the same time as us all, and they're just trying to juggle a few pieces given that the school information changed quite recently. The next thing is a risk assessment should be carried out before opening the facility. This risk assessment is around COVID-19 and minimising the risk of transmission of the virus. Normal risk assessments that you would have for your facility should be carried out anyway, your kind of safety points of it. This would be something that you would just do as an extra, and I'll go into a wee bit more detail on how we can support you in that later on. And the last thing is clubs should undertake initial checks and safety considerations before deciding whether or not to open. And there's just a link there to some of the Sport Scotland information about getting your facilities fit for sport. I appreciate most facilities will have been closed since March. So going in and it's not a case of opening the shutters and the door. There will be some things and safety aspects that we need to consider. But again, we'll highlight all of that as we go on. So just moving on, what is the role of the safety coordinator in this? It is your role to ensure that the club carry out the risk assessment before opening. It is not necessarily your role to carry out the risk assessment. So it's having that overall view and responsibility to ensure that it happens, but it's entirely up to the club to discuss and agree who is the most competent and appropriate person to carry that out. We've been really careful not to dictate who should, because we know that in some clubs, risk assessments may be people's day jobs. Some people may have way more knowledge about it than others. Some people, it's a role they already undertake in the club, or sometimes it's shared out. We're not being specific about who does it. It's just, it'd be the role of the safety officer to ensure that this particular risk assessment happens. As I said previously, your normal risk assessment for activity should also be carried out. So if it's for pitches, when we do get to that indoor space, your normal risk assessment that you have, you would just want to review and update. This would be an additional one. The ask is for the safety coordinator to co-sign the risk assessment, and that's along with a member of the committee. So that means you've potentially got 3 people. You've got a person who's undertaking the risk assessment, member of the committee who's signing it, and the COVID safety officer who's also signing it. What we would also recommend is that with the risk assessment, that appropriate volunteers and staff see that, get visibility of it, understand it, and potentially even sign to say that they do understand it. As things are reviewed and changed, we would recommend that you do the same again, because as Steve, Neil and Dr. James have already pointed out, this is changing constantly, and once you get used to one way of working and those habits set in, there may become a new set and way of working. So in terms of risk assessments and facilities, the COVID Safety Officer Coordinator role is really just being that linchpin in ensuring this all happens, and of course signing that COVID risk assessment. You would want to make sure that you review the risk assessment regularly in line with Scottish Government guidance, and even just as good practice to review it regularly. Again, things are changing. We may have to pull back some things, and then there'll be other things that we can add in and kind of push forward. So just moving on to what resources we have to support you. We've got, in terms of risk assessments, we've got a risk assessment template that you're more than welcome to download and use. You don't have to. If you've got the club one, that's fine, but it's just a real simple template that we've got uploaded on the website. We have an example of an additional COVID-19 risk assessment for pitches, and we are going to have one for outdoor hospitality, which I'll come on to in a wee second. And we also have some just real simple risk assessment guidance. I appreciate it does sound like quite a daunting task, but once you just break it down into what it is you're trying to minimise and what you can put in place, what is the potential risk, how can you minimise it, who's responsible for that, and when will it be done, okay? So all that in terms of risk assessment is currently on the website. As of tomorrow, we will be uploading some more resources. So there'll be an example of additional COVID risk assessments specific to outdoor hospitality and catering. We'll also have an outdoor catering additional guidance document, and that will just have some things for clubs to think about, some compliance things like, you know, checking insurance and licensing, and just recommendations on how best to operate. We've been really lucky. We've had some great support from tenants on opening guidance, how clubs can reopen a bar area, what to do beforehand, and some just general guidance around opening an outdoor catering area, things to consider, small checklists and things like that. And the very last thing we have is tenants have given us their support for the local app, which allows bookings of tables, it allows table service orders. All of that information will become available tomorrow, and everything that we have on the website is here to support you and your club as much as possible.
Okay, thanks, Jen. That was great. So we're just going to move on now to team leads for activity and coaching guidance. So just looking at the role that you could play to support the return to rugby on the pitch, and some sort of recommendations around that. So first of all, as I say, there's quite a lot going on here, and one of our recommendations is that you start to think about appointing a team lead for each team or age or training group to support that return to rugby on the pitch as we go through. And I guess how that role will help you as a safety coordinator. Team leads will just be responsible for the day-to-day management. So when we are looking at things like check-in, check-out processes and training checklists and setting up the pitch to ensure that the pitch is set up and adhering to the guidance that requires for social distancing and things like that, a team lead could be a really crucial role to support that. So I understand and I appreciate that, you know, all clubs are different and you might have your own way of creating a support network for the COVID-19 safety coordinator. But this is just one really useful example where you could appoint team leads for each training group who are responsible for the day-to-day compliance to ensure that we are operating in a safe manner. The team leads could be, led by yourself as a safety coordinator and reporting in to yourself. And when we look at the check-in process and some other recommended documents that we'd be asking a team lead to do within that role, that's something that they would submit or send into a space, so you effectively have oversight of what's going on, but have that support network for that day-to-day monitoring and management as we go through. So again, we've created a role profile for a team lead, which just goes into some key recommended roles and responsibilities for that individual. The role would be suited to a coach or team manager, because it would be somebody who would be with that training group. But that doesn't say it can't be another volunteer who has oversight of that training group as well. So again, it's entirely up to you as a club or school as to who is appointed as a team lead, or how you want to structure that, whether it's one person for every group or whether it's one person for every couple of groups. But certainly the key kind of functions of this team lead role would certainly be something that we would recommend as a governing body to create that, to assist with the day-to-day monitoring and the processes. One key thing which we've touched on, Neil touched on with this phase 2 guidance, was just that check-in, check-out process. Purpose and importance of this process is just to support that contact tracing. So if it does, if there is a circumstance where a player does get COVID-19, if we have robust check-in, check-out processes for all of our training activity, and that's stored within a centralised location within your club, then it will just support the NHS to identify that contact tracing. So again, we've pulled together a couple of different examples which you could utilise. So we've got on the link there, so when I send out the presentation, there'll be a link, and we've just got a nice simple Word document that sits on our website, which effectively players can check in, timestamp as they check in, and then timestamp as they check out as well. There are other options which might be slightly easier to use, so we will create a sort of an example Google Sheet online form to allow players to do it online, so it makes it paperless. And the Eventbrite also, so that that picture on the right hand side, just as an example of Eventbrite, which also can be used, which is a free online platform to also create that check-in, check-out registration process. Role of safety coordinator within this would be to develop that process, but then ensure that your team leads or your identified individuals for managing that training group has access to it and is certainly aware of it, and then they're ensuring that that process is managed on a day-to-day basis at training sessions. As I said, really important that these are time-stamped, they're dated, and then saved in a stored, in one centralised stored place, preferably online, like Google Docs, as an example. But I'm sure you'll have other uses as well. The second thing that we are recommending for team leads to take responsibility on is just a training checklist. So just to supplement the risk assessment, the pitch reopening risk assessment that Jen was talking about, is just another useful tool for team leads to ensure that when we are training on our pitches, that we're taking in consideration key guidelines and just having a bit of a checklist to ensure that everything is set up appropriately for that session to mitigate any risks. So again, we've got a good link to an example document here. It's important that this checklist that you use is relevant to your own environment. So it may be that you can add or take out certain things within that checklist. But as I say, it's another useful document which we'd recommend that is done for every session to make sure that all the appropriate measures are put in place for a safe training session. So a couple of examples would just be to ensure that check-in, check-out register is taken, to ensure that alcohol gel sanitizers stations and hand washing stations are set up with appropriate signage for players and coaches to use for entry into the pitch and exit from the pitch as well, and various other things. It does also talk a wee bit about the actions and behaviours. So Dr. James referenced the no handshaking, no huddles, no close physical contact at the moment within our guidelines, just to again reinforce these messages on a day-to-day basis. Again, just for sort of accuracy of storing information, what we would be recommending again is that there's a date stamped and then stored within a centralised place, and that again will just help you as safety coordinator have an oversight online, and again, if we need to back reference anything, we have these types of documents in place, so we can utilise them and access them at any time. So we also have some useful examples for player guidance as well. So this is quite a lot of information in the next 2 slides. And the next 2 slides is we've got available in a poster format, which can be downloaded and printed and put up around your clubhouse. But again, just some guidance for players, and again, just thinking about your role as safety coordinator and disseminating this information to team leads. One thing that we are talking about is scheduling in appropriate training slots. So if we are thinking at the moment about max of 8 players from up to 3 households on one pitch at any time, we might need to think about scheduling in training slots across a period of time. So training slots might need to be a bit shorter than normal, and they'll need to be scheduled in at appropriate times. So that is something that, again, we would be looking for the team leads to do in conjunction with you as a safety coordinator, and then obviously that being communicated out to your players, so players are turning up at the correct time. We're also, the middle box there, we're asking the players to complete the NHS self-help guide, which is a useful link, and if you click on that box when the presentation comes out, it takes you through to the self-help guide, which is again something that we'd be looking for players to do. And there's a few other different things within here that has been referenced. On arrival, so again, I think we'd be asking players this again to communicate with your players and members that to arrive no more than 5 minutes prior to your allocated time slot, and then again, when training is finished, we're just leaving immediately. So we're coming in, we're doing our session, and then we're just leaving immediately. And obviously, as we've referenced, the check-in process and then the behaviours of handshakes and high fives and fist pumps is not to be permitted. During the session, I'll come on to a wee bit about some sort of guidance on training zones and how we could set up our pitch to allow for the appropriate measures in place. We've touched on players in max groups of 8 with no more than 2 households. Exercising alone and not sharing any equipment at the moment. And then again, which probably links to how we set up a pitch as team leads, is just maintaining that physical distance at all times. And then again, which a couple of things that we've talked about, but would be key to communicate to our players is just the behaviours around personal hygiene. And then after training, like we do when we go to the shops and out and about, is just that hand hygiene. So again, as safety coordinators, ensuring that processes are in place for hand wash facilities and sanitising facilities at the side of the pitch. So on entry and exit, players and coaches can wash their hands, as we are all getting very used to just now. We'd also be recommending, or the equipment must be sanitised. So at the moment, when we can't be sharing equipment, so there probably isn't a huge amount of equipment that we're using. But as we do progress, and when equipment such as balls, etc., can be shared, and anything that we're using they would need to be sanitised after training as well. And then as clubhouses are closed at the moment and those facilities are closed, I've stressed that we would be recommending and communicating to players that they leave immediately and obviously shower at home. So a wee bit of information in there, but I think takeaway from this is that one, this as a poster format is available on the website to download, but there's probably some key pieces of information that we need to think about that we're disseminating to our team leads, and that has been communicated to our members, so everybody's aware of the guidelines when we are turning up for training and for leaving. From a coaching point of view, so we're just talking about, so players at the moment are going to be very eager to get down to training. So we just need to make sure that when we're doing that, it's done in a controlled and measured fashion. So coaching activities should be age and stage appropriate. Coaches should not deliver, so coaches count as a household. So coaches should not deliver training to more than 2 households at any one time, or provide coaching to more than 2 households per day. So again, a key piece of information that we need to be communicating with our coaches and our members. And then again, just to reinforce the previous messages, and I suppose utilise the helpful documentation that we've provided, or to utilise your own. Is just around that risk assess and plan appropriate for sessions in advance. So if we are asking our team leads to complete a training checklist before sessions, it's just communicating that with them and making sure that we are doing that. And then just a couple of examples of pitch setups. So there will be others. These are just examples at the moment. But I say there's 2 examples of just how we can set up the pitch to help us ensure that physical distancing is in place in our small groups. So I suppose that, again, a key message for this is just to ensure that they are set up in a fashion like this and they're clearly marked. And I suppose when players are turning up, the players are they understand and know what zone they're going into. So there's no cross migration of different groups or different players within different zones. So in terms of sort of where we're at the moment, as we've referenced through this evening, that things are moving on fairly quickly. It's our responsibility to ensure that all these documentations are kept up to date, kept refreshed. Neil mentioned about our hub on the website, which has all this information, but also that we are regularly touching base through webinars and through those check-in sessions as we progress. So we are keeping this information and updates and sort of consolidating it in a way it's hopefully digestible for you as safety coordinators. Just a bit of a timeline for over the next couple of weeks and some key dates to pick out. So obviously we're doing our first safety coordinator webinar tonight. Tomorrow, so we're communicating the roadmap tomorrow. So the Scottish Rugby Return to Rugby roadmap, and then there's a webinar tomorrow at 3 p.m. Where we'll be going through that roadmap. Also tomorrow, as Jen's referenced, outdoor catering guidance will be announced as well, and there could potentially be a webinar next week for that as well. In terms of for this group, in terms of the next webinar, the Scottish Government Phase 3 announcement is next Thursday, the 9th of July. So then we would look to produce our Stage 3 documentation and guidance on the 10th of July. So a sensible time for this next webinar and this next update for COVID-19 safety coordinators would be the 14th of July. So we will schedule that and communicate that next webinar out to you, which is in less than 2 weeks' time, which is just a good representation of how often we'll be doing these sessions. And then, as it says, on the 15th of July, potentially, and caveat that the indoor hospitality can open at the moment, but that's obviously caveated with things can change at the same time. So that is us for this evening. So hopefully that was hopefully it was useful. And once again, I really want to thank you for your time. Before we just close off for the night, Neil, I wonder if there's just any questions that have come through this evening that we can pick out and answer at the moment.
Yeah, thanks, Steve. Thanks, everyone, for sticking with us, and I hope you're finding some of this guidance useful. As I say, it is a very fluid situation. We've got loads of great questions coming in. We've tried to respond to some of them live, Steve. So, but as Steve said, we will take all these and put an FAQ document out afterwards. Probably, Steve, the one to touch on right at the moment is around about the 8 players per pitch, and that's coming up quite a lot. So the guidance that we have put out in phase 2 is that 8 players maximum per pitch, from maximum of 3 households. So if one player is going with 2 other people, that's from obviously 2 other households, that's fine, but 3 maximum households, a group of 8. So, the likelihood is that will look like maybe 3 players from 3 separate households in all likelihood, unless you have, people living together and you can extend that group. So we understand there's a bit of frustration probably coming through from the numbers there, but that is our guidance, and that is aligned to Scottish Government guidelines and has been approved by them. We do hope to relax that moving into phase 3, which, as Steve just talked about regarding our timeline, is actually next week. The announcement is on the 9th. So we hope in phase 3 to relax some of that. But I think patience is really the key here. We need to be patient. We need to do what's right and when it's safe to do so. Opening the floodgates now to mass numbers of people training, it could lead to us going back a stage and putting people's ultimately health at risk. So going back to Dr. James's point at the start, it's really crucial that we take really cautious stages at this early stage before we move into any group training type of scenarios. But we do hope on the horizon that we can get to group training and we can have more than maximum of 8 people per pitch. So yeah, thank you for those questions that have come in, and we'll communicate any further relaxation of that in the coming days. So that's probably the main one coming through. There was Jen, there's a bit about risk assessment. I think it's been answered pretty much now around about, are we signing anything off? I don't know if you wanted to give anything just verbally about that.
Yeah, there was just a question around, do risk assessments need to be inspected or submitted to Scottish Rugby? And the answer is no. All clubs will be absolutely different in terms of risk assessments. You'll have different facilities, you will all work in different ways. It's absolutely the club's responsibility for the risk assessment, so no need to send anything to us.
Great, Jen. And lastly, Steve, it's one that it's coming up a lot, and we're getting lots of questions every day about it. Really, is around about the announcement last week from the Scottish Government around about children and young persons contact sport returning. Now, we don't know what the age group is on that yet. We're still seeking clarification on that matter. And as I've put in one of the answers, we will be looking to communicate our guidance on that next week ahead of the 13th start date for that new policy. So again, we don't have all the answers to that at the moment, so we will only communicate when we're absolutely crystal clear on what the guidance is, and at a time that is in line with government and Sports Scotland guidance. So again, please be patient with that side of things. We are receiving updates pretty regularly from government, but we'll put out information next week around about that point in particular. So that's really it, Steve. I think from terms of most of the questions we'll pick up, probably post this in a Q&A.
Yeah, perfect. Thanks, Neil. I can see there's still questions coming in, so just said we will pick up those questions. We'll put together an FAQs document and then put that onto the website early next week. So hopefully we'll get most of those questions, if they haven't already been answered. So just final message for me before we sign off is just to, we appreciate and recognise that most of you here are volunteers. So we really do appreciate the kind of efforts you're all making to ensure that we can return to rugby safely. And certainly from our point of view, in supporting you in your roles, is that we will do all we can to support that through training, through producing these documents, and through the regular check-ins as well. So I just want to, on behalf of everybody who spoke tonight, just want to thank you all for your attendance. We look forward to speaking in the next week or so, and hope you take care and have a good night. Thank you.
Helping out at a rugby club is always time well spent. Your local rugby club needs more volunteers. Go on, get involved.